Hello, friends. Can you believe we're almost through this cycle of the narrative lectionary? We started back in Genesis and we've walked through scriptures until now we are in the book of Galatians, which is where we will end up. We have only 3 more weeks of the narrative lectionary cycle. Galatians is one of the epistles in the New Testament, one of the letters, and there are several letters in the New Testament. This particular letter to the churches in Galatia is thought by some scholars to be the earliest of the New Testament writings. It's dated as early as possibly 48 CE, and even if it has a slightly later date to it, it is almost certain that this epistle was written before the Gospels, which means that the people who received it and heard it read did not have the gospel texts, did not have these written records of Jesus' life and Jesus' teaching. This was one of the few written texts that they had regarding the particular faith in Jesus. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind in thinking of how people would have heard this letter from the Apostle Paul. Most scholars agree that Paul did actually write this letter to the churches in Galatia, so it's not to one particular person or one particular congregation. It's to be shared among the congregations, probably house churches. Somewhere, there's disagreement about exactly where, but somewhere in the region of modern-day Turkey is where Galatia would have been. And the churches there would have shared this letter around so that people could hear the words from their spiritual leader, Paul, who we think probably started many of those churches and brought the message about Jesus to that region. Now, I know Paul can be kind of hard to take sometimes. I experience his writing that way. Some of the things he says, but also just because of the density of the writing, the sort of circular rhetoric that is not commonly the way we communicate today. I think you'll hear some of that in Jill's reading of the scripture. It can be hard to process and get through. One thing we also need to be careful of with Paul's writing, and the book of Galatians in some ways in particular, is that it has been used in the past in ways that are harmful towards people of the Jewish faith. And we always have to realize that Paul was himself Jewish and committed to all that he learned and from the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures following through, that Paul is now following Jesus, but is not intending to completely dismiss or denigrate the Jewish faith. So we want to be careful of how we're reading and using the scriptures in that regard as well. I think that if we can get past the difficult rhetoric and some of the bristliness of Paul's personality, we will find some very beautiful and helpful and central teachings about our Christian faith in this letter to the Galatians.